Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's an honor to be here as part of this lecture series. As Jim mentioned, I began by studying Disgust, and back then people assumed my name was John Haidt, and then I switched over to studying Moral Elevation, and now my name is John Haidt. And as Paul said, many of us, I'm very active in positive psychology, many of us just sort of stumbled into the study of positive emotions, not, I think, because of any deep internal problem that we were having, just because nobody was doing it. There was these wide open fields, these emotions that nobody was looking at. And I think the work of C-Care is really an example of that. I was just asking some of the C-Care staff today if they've been involved in positive psychology, because it really is a movement since the late 90s to look at the human strengths and virtues, the causes of human well-being, that many of which were neglected. And I think compassion, well, there's been research on altruism for a long time, but compassion as an emotion has not been studied intensively until recently. And so I'm very excited to have this new association with C-Care, and I'm very impressed by the work that they're doing on the emotion of compassion. Now, at the same time, though, today I'm going to offer some constructive criticism of the approach that is sometimes taken, and it's the bottom line is that I think that the approach taken to the study of compassion and altruism reflects certain assumptions about human nature that are probably widely shared by people in this room, but that I think need to be examined, and that's what I'll do in my talk tonight. So first, before we get into the real content of the talk, let's start with a little projective test. I'm going to read you two little passages of text, and just how do they make you feel? So just imagine that there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. There's nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Okay? Like it? Don't like it? Okay, here's another piece of text. It is not true, then, that human activity can be released from all restraint. Man's characteristic privilege is that the bond he accepts is not physical but moral, that is, social. He is governed not by a material environment brutally imposed on him, but by a conscience superior to his own, the superiority of which he feels. Like it? Don't like it? Does it make you happy? Well, let's take a vote. The first passage was from John Lennon, of course, and the second is from Emil Durkheim from his book Suicide. So what I'd like you to do now is first let's just vote which one makes you feel better. Raise your hand if it's the John Lennon, and raise your hand if it's Suicide. Okay. Now here's the harder question. Which one do you think is a better philosophy for running a decent, caring, and compassionate society? Do you think that there would be more total care and compassion and well-being if we were to follow this general philosophy of removing the artificial divisions that separate people, removing constraints? Raise your hand if you think that John Lennon offers us a better guide for how to run a society. And raise your hand if you think Emil Durkheim does, in which case we need to basically strengthen constraints. Okay, so a substantial majority here favors John Lennon, although many of you sensed, I think, that this was a trick question. You didn't want to look foolish, so I think that perhaps another voting regimen would have gotten an even more dramatic result. The point is, the majority of you resonated to John Lennon and thought that it was a good way to run a society. What I basically gave you were two illustrations of the two visions of human nature talked about by Thomas Sowell, who's here at Stanford at the Hoover Foundation, I think. At any rate, Sowell says that throughout history we find, especially in modern history since the Enlightenment, we find two basic visions of human nature. Either people think that human nature is malleable and can be improved, perhaps even perfected if social conditions are improved. Anything is possible if constraints are removed. Take off the constraints and people will flourish. He contrasts that with the constrained vision. Now, this is not the Hobbesian vision. Hobbesians who think that, people are just terrible, evil, sexual, aggressive creatures and you have to strain. That would be a constrained vision, but Sowell is really not talking about that extreme. He's talking more about people like Edmund Burke, David Hume, the founding fathers, Hamilton and John Jay, who thought that, well, yes, we have moral emotions, we have compassion, so Adam Smith fits in here, but you need institutions that will hem people in, restrain their baser side, and allow the positive side to come out, or that will harness, as in Adam Smith's case, that will harness selfishness ultimately for positive ends, as is the basic philosophy of capitalism. So that's the constrained vision, that you need these laws, institutions, customs, and traditions, and nations and religions. in order to have a flourishing, functioning society. Those are the two basic visions that will be crucial for my talk. I'm just going to do one last little poll of the audience here, which is related, I think, in a way I already know the answer from what you've told me. Politically, would you describe yourselves as liberal or left of center, or would you say center, or would you say right of center, conservative, or would you say libertarian? So raise your hand if you would describe yourself as liberal or left of center politically. Okay, the great strong majority of you. Raise your hand if you'd say you were centrist. Okay, a fair number. Raise your hand if you'd say you are conservative or right of center. No, more socially. Raise your hand high if you would say you are overall conservative, right of center, and if in doubt, we're going with social here. Raise your hand. You can't. Am I talking too fast? Okay. Are you liberal, conservative, or centrist? How many? So raise your hand again if you would say you are conservative, right of center. 1, 2. Okay. And raise your hand if you're libertarian. Okay. So this is the common distribution I get for academic audiences. Almost about 80 to 90% liberal, about 1% conservative, and the rest centrist or libertarian. I think probably we should hold questions until the end of the main talk, and we'll have a lot of time for discussion at that point. Okay. So with that as our prologue, now we're ready to address the real topic of the talk, which is this puzzle. This is, I watched Paul Ekman gave a talk here a while ago, and Jim's introduction, Jim said, well, if compassion is so good for us, why doesn't everyone pursue it? Being compassionate and being happy are free, so why is it so hard to achieve it? This, I suppose, is the animating question of C-Care. It's a very good question, and C-Care is trying to answer it, investigating many of the, let's call them, psychological obstacles. What conditions will make people feel more compassionate? Can we teach people to be more compassionate? What parts of the brain are lighting up? Why aren't people more compassionate? And you look at people and you try to figure out how to increase their compassion. Here's from the webpage of C-Care. It was established by Stanford and to examine methods for cultivating compassion and promoting altruism within individuals and society-wide. So that's the goal, is to increase the total amount of altruism and compassion in society. So you focus on these psychological obstacles, but in my talk today, I'm going to suggest that there are also some major moral and political obstacles, which I think are very, very great obstacles, and which will lead us back ultimately to a discussion of some other psychological obstacles that I think would be helpful to consider. The structure of my talk is this. First, I'll talk about what morality is and the importance of binding groups together around shared ideas of sacredness. Then I'll talk about how liberal morality is built mostly on one of these psychological foundations, that is, issues of care and harm. Third, I'll show that to relieve the suffering of victims, who are the core sacralized object in the liberal moral order, in the pursuit of that, liberals violate the other 5 foundations and commit 5 kinds of sacrilege. If you violate sacred values, you are committing sacrilege for anyone who holds those values. And last, I will end by praising constrained parochialism, which sounds like a very conservative concept, and is, but I'll argue that it is perhaps the best way to advance the C-Care agenda and many of the liberal values of increasing care and altruism. Okay, here we go. Here's part 1. Many animals are social. Sociality is a very good feature for animals to reap all kinds of benefits from group living. So sociality is very, very common, but only a few animals on Earth, or a few species on Earth, are what we could call ultra-social, way beyond social. They live together in groups of hundreds, thousands, even millions in some cases, massive division of labor, even a willingness to die for the group. The Hymenoptera were the first creatures on Earth who discovered this evolutionary trick, and they did it by concentrating breeding in a queen so that they're all sisters, or brothers and sisters. So that's the Hymenoptera, and then some other animals discovered it totally independently. Some cockroaches figured out this trick of having a queen, and they changed body type, and we now know them as termites. Also naked mole rats. In recent years, it's been discovered that there's some shrimp and aphids. Ultrasociality turns out to have evolved 10, 20, 30 times in the history of life. But in all cases, everybody is a very close relative, typically a first-degree sibling. There's only one species on Earth that can do this without being kin. These people are all working together, dividing labor, in some cases volunteering to kill themselves for the cause, in some cases volunteering just to gross out the rest of us. None of these people are, well, some of them may be sisters and brothers, but basically all of this gets done without kinship. How? How can there be a creature on Earth that is so good at ultra-sociality without any need for kinship? How can that be? Well, the answer is that we have this special trick, you see. We evolved this incredible trick, unlike anything else in the history of life, of being able to circle around sacred objects, and when we circle around sacred objects together, we then trust each other and can function together as a team. So these are Muslims bowing down at Mecca. You don't have to physically move in a circle. The Pope obviously is His Holiness, the Pope, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. As long as people share ideas about what is holy, what is sacred, what is untouchable, then they will be bound together into a community that can work together and achieve some degree of ultra-sociality. This ability is absolutely crucial for war. We wouldn't have war without this. We wouldn't have civilization, but we wouldn't have war, and we wouldn't have politics. War, politics, religion, all of these things are manifestations of this incredible ability we have to bind ourselves together with large groups that are not blood relatives and often risk our lives or give our lives. So the psychology of sacredness requires that something be elevated. We circle around it either metaphorically or physically. And then once something is sacralized, no jokes, no trade-offs. You have an irrational commitment to it and to protecting it. And everybody shares that commitment, and that makes them a group. So when you circle around something, it's as though, I hesitate to say this because I'm sure there's some engineers in the audience or physicists, but as I understand it, when you move metal particle or metal lines through an electric field, it generates a current. In the same way, when people circle around a sacred object, it's as though it creates an electric field that makes everybody line up. And you see this certainly in academic disciplines, I've argued. People line up along the invisible lines of flux, and those are the sorts of opinions that are permitted, and others that violate that are not permitted and are not expressed. So that's all I'll say about the first point, that morality is about binding groups together around sacred objects or principles. This is not generally the way you approach morality, probably. You probably think it has something to do with not hurting people, with being fair, with keeping promises. But I'm telling you from an evolutionary point of view, this, I think, is a better way to understand this incredible ability of our species about group binding. All right, part two. Liberal morality is built mostly on one foundation. That, at least, is my assertion. I'll show you some evidence for that. In graduate school, I had two sort of epiphanies while I was reading about morality. One was that evolutionary psychology was true, at least that we are products of evolution. Another is that cultural psychology is true. That is, that we live in matrices that are constructed before we ever got here, and we live on these threads, and that you have to look both at our evolutionary history and at our cultural development to understand anything interesting about us. And what I've tried to do is to say, okay, what are the psychological foundations that evolution has put in our minds, modules, if you will, in a certain way? What are these psychological foundations, and how do they develop within a cultural context to give us the vast variety of moral matrices and moral worlds that we find? And so from a review of the anthropological and evolutionary literature, my colleagues and I came to the conclusion that there are 6 best candidates. The first one is care and harm. We're all mammals here, right? Everyone in this room is a mammal. Well, if you're a mammal, that means you are the product of a long history of evolution for caring for children. Your bodies are designed for it. Your hormones, oxytocin, have been pulled into new services to change our behavior. We are all mammals. We are all designed to care and protect. Now, everybody has this. Everybody cares about suffering, cruelty, violence, harm. But is it equally distributed across the political spectrum? Here's a car I photographed on my way to work in Charlottesville. You can see the bumper stickers say, "Stop the genocide, save Darfur, humane eating, and save Darfur." Any guesses? Liberal or conservative? It's pretty obvious because this person has a one foundation decorating scheme. This person chose exclusively stickers about stopping cruelty to innocent victims. So we know this person must be liberal. Here's a coffee shop I was in New Paltz, New York. The signs say, "No one is free when others are oppressed," "How to end violence against women and children," and then there's an American flag where the stars are replaced by logos of corporations. Any guess? Liberal or conservative coffee shop? Well, you know it's liberal because they have a one foundation decorating scheme. Their decorations are all about protecting innocent victims. Okay? So social justice, I believe, basically means we circle around certain victim groups, and then we demonize the powerful. Corporations, it can be the government in some cases, but in general, the government is then what's necessary to protect those innocent victims, at least in the current American situation. A little quantitative evidence. So my colleagues and I have a website called yourmorals.org, where we've had about 200,000 people come from all over the world, mostly America, and we've had about 60 surveys so far. I'm just going to show you little bits of data, but bear in mind that for each of the basic claims I'm making, we've got a lot of studies showing this in multiple ways. The way to read these graphs that I'll show you is that when people come to the website, they register, and they're asked to self-describe as, are you, very liberal, slightly liberal, neutral, well, that's centrist, moderate, slightly conservative, or conservative. I've collapsed the very liberal and liberal together, and so I've reduced it to a 5-point scale, left-right. That's what they said when they register. Then they take whatever surveys they want, and we can look at their responses by their graph, by their politics. In this case, this is the Moral Foundations questionnaire has questions about all the different moral foundations. And there are 6 items in each foundation. So here's one item for the CARE Foundation. Compassion for those who are suffering is the most crucial virtue. Do you strongly agree with it? Agree with it? Neither agree nor disagree. So people they respond to all these survey questions, and we average them together and give them a score. What you see here is just for this single item, but all the items work the same way. For this single item, scale goes from 0, actually goes to 5 is the highest possible value. Everyone, left, right, and center, cares about, everybody thinks that compassion is good on average. Liberals are more likely over here. Liberals give a higher rating to this question than conservatives. The midpoint of the scale is actually 2.5. So conservatives are just very conservative people are just slightly positive. People who say they're liberal or very liberal are substantially positive. So liberals agree with this item more than conservatives. But everybody cares about care to some extent. And that's the basic finding on the CARE Foundation. More data, I'll just show you very briefly. One survey we use is the Interpersonal Reactivity Index. It's a very widely used measure of people's sympathy, empathy, how they respond to the suffering in others. There are 4 subscales. The white bars show the responses from all liberals, the black bars from all conservatives, and the hatched bars in the middle from all the self-described libertarians. What you can see is that for all 4 kinds of empathy here, liberals score the highest, and libertarians this is the one that most matters right here. That is empathic concern. This is the one that's closest to the concerns of C-care. Just how much does it bother you when you see other people suffering? What we see is that liberals have the highest responses on these items. Libertarians, by far the lowest. Basically, what we find is that libertarians are more like liberals than they are like conservatives in their personality, except that they are pretty lacking in empathy. So liberals are the highest, libertarians the lowest, and conservatives are in between. So liberals score higher on every measure of empathy that we've ever used. And liberals often define their morality in terms of this one foundation. Here's a definition from Sam Harris, the new atheist. As I believe, morality is a system of thinking about and maximizing the well-being of conscious creatures like ourselves, then many people's moral concerns are frankly immoral. And then he says that Muslims, Jews, Christians, everybody, all those religious, they're all immoral. What's moral is a morality based on reducing suffering. And who offers that? What is the one religion that offers that? That's right. So when you look at the Dalai Lama, you look at, obviously there are many branches of Hinduism. Care and compassion is, of course, important in all of them. But the Dalai Lama, I think, puts it quite clearly when he says, we all naturally desire happiness and not to suffer. These are rights, from which, in my opinion, we can infer that an ethical act is one which does not harm others' experience or expectation of happiness. If you read this book, you will find, or at least I found, that there is no gap, no daylight between the Dalai Lama and standard American politically liberal secular morality. It's as though it was written by any liberal philosopher. Well, I was about to say it's as though it was written by Sam Harris, except the emotional tone is night and day. You can do this with either love in your heart, or you can do it with anger. This is with love in his heart. But the point is, in terms of the moral foundations, it's a one foundation. Morality is reducing harm and suffering. Okay? So that's all I'll say about this second point. I hope that you'll agree with me that liberal morality builds primarily on this one foundation. There are other issues. There are issues of rights in liberal theory and liberal tradition, which I'll come back to. But the core of it, I believe, is concerns about care, harm, suffering, victimization. All right, this sets us up for what I hope will be the most important part, the part that you really take away from this lecture, which is that if you have this sort of morality and you sacralize victim groups, and you don't think that there's more to morality than harm, then you are pretty much guaranteed to trample on all the other moral values that other people in this country hold sacred. So here we go. The second foundation is proportionality or cheating. We used to call it fairness, but what we've now realized is that there's so many different kinds of fairness. The real core of fairness is not equality. I'll come back to equality later. The real core of fairness is proportionality or equity. Are you taking out in proportion to what you put in, or are you a free rider, a slacker trying to take without giving? Are you trying to cheat us? Are you trying to rip us off? And this psychological system guards groups against free riders, cheaters, and slackers. It's crucial for cooperation. If any of you have ever lived in a group home, a group house, lived with friends, you know that if there's one, or especially if there's two other people in the house, pretty quickly it's going to descend into accusations of whose turn it was supposed to be to do the dishes, et cetera, et cetera. Now, equality matters, of course, but equality matters primarily in the special case in which all inputs were the same. So if everybody contributed the same, then yes, everyone should get equal returns. But if not, then not. Here's another car I saw in Charlottesville. Any guesses about whether this person's liberal or conservative? Well, not just the Namaste and the Gandhi, but the idea that an eye for an eye, that is proportionality, that's reciprocity on the negative side. If somebody does something bad should be done to them. Well, that seems to endorse a kind of violence, moralistic violence, reciprocal violence. Well, that's bad because that's violence. So no, we shouldn't do an eye for an eye. That's a very bad way to run things. So this person, we can be quite confident, is politically liberal. Here's a conservative bumper sticker. Conservatives are sick and tired of liberal compassion, in part or primarily because it violates proportionality. It violates fairness. A liberal is one that believes in compassion with everyone else's money. Take from people who, just take from others and give to the slackers and free riders. The conservative idea, this was a sign from a Tea Party rally, spread my work ethic, not my wealth. And this is not just an American thing. Here's one of the election posters for Cameron in the UK. Let's cut benefits for those who refuse to work. He's all saying, let's do it. Let's cut benefits for those who refuse to work. Yes. So this is an electoral slogan. You can rally people behind such a slogan. This is a call for fairness. But it's not equality, it's proportionality. So here's the data, the same sort of data I was showing you before. So this is this is three different kinds of equality. We have a whole bunch of different items we test out, and here are three of the items. So one item was a fair society would be one in which everyone's needs were met to the same degree. Would that be a fair society? And liberals say yes. Conservatives are right at the midline. They're not sure. And if we were to go to extreme conservatives, they're slightly negative. But the point is, this idea of meeting everyone's needs equally is a liberal idea of what a fair society is. But employees who work the hardest should be paid the most. Do you agree with that? A little bit? A lot? Well, everybody agrees with, on average, all across the spectrum, people agree with it. But note that liberals agree with it pretty, moderately strongly, but it gets stronger for conservatives. So conservatives strongly agree with that item. But now you've got a conflict. What if you believe both? Well, okay, so what do we do when some people work harder than others and they get paid the most? And then their needs get met the most. And there's some who aren't working very hard and their needs aren't. Well, what do we do? We've got a conflict. If you're a liberal. If you're conservative, there's no conflict. Here's another item. A criminal should be made to suffer in the same way that his victim suffered. That sounds rather harsh, and liberals give it a very, very low. They substantially disagree with it, just disagree with it, and conservatives actually slightly agree with it, or right just above the midpoint. So my point is, overall, liberals value equality, but all other kinds of fairness, those related to proportionality, are valued more by conservatives. Okay, so with that as the background, now you can see how it is that the right, especially, for example, the Tea Party right, is furious at liberals, how liberalism became a dirty word in the 1980s all the way up to the present time, in this way. If you sacralize victim groups, you say we must protect certain groups that have been historically victimized or are currently being victimized, and if that's your top priority, then you're going to define fairness as the pursuit of group-based equality or social justice. And then you're going to pursue policies like race-based affirmative action, which is a wildly unpopular policy in this country. I was on a conference call with some liberal pollsters around the time of the Michigan Supreme Court decision, and they were all trying to figure out, nobody's found it. Why can't we find the wording? What's the messaging? How can we get Americans to vote in all these state referenda that we're going to do away with race-based affirmative action? And I had to say, well, you can't find one because it's not there. There is no way to argue that race-based affirmative action is fair. Now, class-based, that's wildly, everybody sees that. But what you hear on conservative talk radio a lot is they quote Martin Luther King. They're always quoting him. I have a dream that someday, my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skins. So liberals end up pursuing policies that end up very strongly violating basic notions of proportionality. Liberal social policies ignore the Protestant work ethic. They channel benefits to the poor unconditionally. In fact, you could describe many liberal social programs, especially those from the 60s, they got refined a bit, as basically, let's tax the ants to bail out the grasshoppers, for those of you who know the ant and the Aesop's fables. And on crime and punishment, liberals tend to side with the accused because the accused are often thought to be members of victimized groups, and so if you habitually favor the accused and think that the police are lying and the DA is lying and the laws are racist or prejudicial. So on conservative talk radio, they're always talking about how liberal judges want to release all the child rapists to come to your neighborhood. So anyway, you can see how the pursuit of liberal values gives conservatives quite a lot of fodder to raise moral outrage against liberals. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal titled What the Tea Partiers Really Want, and I summarized it by the basic idea that what they want is to maintain the law of karma. Not in all its respects, but the basic idea is in the law of karma is like the law of gravity. If you do something, it will come back and affect you. If you do good, something good will happen to you. And so the liberal perspective is to say, look, he's about to be hit by this domino. Somebody save him. And the conservative answer is, don't you dare. Don't you dare interfere with the law of karma. Now, obviously, the law of karma was actually created to explain why it is that terrible things happen to obviously innocent people. So I'm not saying that the Tea Partiers are right to say we've got to never bail people out. Obviously, bad things happen. People get diseases. People get cancer. It has nothing to do with anything they did. So I'm not saying it's right overall, but I think there is an element of truth here that in protecting people, you often end up degrading the system to encourage more bad behavior. I think that is pretty straightforward, and anybody who's had a child has probably noticed that many times. So what the Tea Partiers really want, what the Tea Party is really about, it's not really fundamentally about liberty. That's some of the original leadership of it. But what really, the main issue that they're about is karma. So here's the rant that launched the Tea Party, Rick Santelli, about the Bush and then Obama bailouts. The government's promoting bad behavior. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? How many of you ants want to bail out the grasshoppers? Raise your hand. And that is the line that launched the Tea Party. So that's the second foundation. And it's the same sort of story. I can do it much more briefly because they're simpler for the other foundations. So the third foundation of morality, remember we had care was the first, proportionality is the second. Now we're on loyalty and betrayal. So again, many animals are social, but only when you get groups that can organize in this way, organized by norms, rules, punishments, shared intentions, shared goals, then you can get not just war and the military, but you get sports, which is, I think, sports is to war what pornography is to sex. We like this stuff. We like this groupish tribal stuff so much that we spend massive amounts of time just watching men form artificial tribes and then rooting for them. And I never really understood that myself, but I'm told that sports is immensely enjoyable. As once again, there you go. So again, if you have a one foundation morality versus if you have this loyalty foundation, you're going to have very different ideas about what it means to support our troops. And for anybody who understands the loyalty foundation, it means you give them everything you can so that they win. That's what it means to support them. But if you don't get that, if you don't think about loyal groups, if you think about individuals that might suffer, you think, support our troops, bring them home alive. I support them, I want them to survive. And for most of the country who cares about loyalty and national patriotism issues, that is, at very worst, at very best, a sort of a tin ear. You miss it. You don't get what this is really about. Here's a little stronger example. 2 photographs I took near my house in Charlottesville. One person paid extra money to get a license plate that says "Oh Glory," Old Glory, and it says "United We Stand." So they paid $30 extra a year to the Virginia Department of Transit to get the bumper license celebrating the American flag. They have a Virginia Cavaliers sticker, which is our sports team. So they're tribal, groupish, sport. Yay UVA, yay America. Conversely, here's a stop sign where someone says "Stop Americanism." Now, it could, of course, be an Al-Qaeda operative in Charlottesville, Virginia, but my guess is it was a far-left, possibly anarchist youth spray painting vandalism about how much he hates America, in terms of especially American foreign policy, which is oppressive. Here, this one really sort of hurts to even see, but now I'm not saying this is a common sentiment. I think it's a very rare sentiment, but this is at the extreme left, the anarchist fringe of the left. You get a hostility to anything related remotely to the military or authority. And it just makes it so easy. I mean, liberals are just, they hand ammunition to Ann Coulter by the shovelful for her to write books like Treason, Liberal Treachery from the Cold War to the War on Terrorism. So I'll show you just the data here for the next 3 foundations. It's all the same story. Here is the exact same blue line I showed you before about care. Remember, liberals value at most. Everybody values it, but liberals value at most. Now, these are the lines for the foundation scores, not individual items. This is the average of all the items on that foundation. So liberals value care more. Oh, no, I'm sorry. These are individual items. All right, so that's the line I showed you before. The green line here is it is more important to be a team player than to express oneself. Totally non-political question. We try to not ask, like, what do you think about gun control or abortion? We don't ask that. It is more important to be a team player than to express oneself. Liberals disagree. Conservatives agree. That's an example of the loyalty foundation. You value groups as things that command you to submit your individuality and your goals to the group, to what the group is trying to achieve. Respect for authority is something all children need to learn. Liberals disagree, conservatives agree. That's the authority foundation. And people should not do things that are disgusting, even if no one is harmed. Liberals strongly disagree, and conservatives agree. So these are the next three foundations I'm talking about, the loyalty, authority, and sanctity foundations. Bottom line, liberals value care, but not loyalty, authority, and sacredness. Sorry, sanctity. Sanctity. Conservatives value them equally. Now, I'm not saying that liberals don't ever value it. Liberals can do teams. They can do team sports. And, of course, they can be a team to fight the conservative team. It's not that they don't have it. I'm just saying, relatively speaking, conservative moral matrices are built on all of the foundations, and liberals are focused on care and harm. That's our finding. And so, if you don't value the loyalty foundation, if you sacralize victim groups, then you're going to blame America for harming victims. And you see this on the far left, the constant, of course they hated George Bush, but they even hate Obama because he didn't stop the wars. America's still killing people. Therefore, America is bad. Also the founding fathers are bad because they had slaves. They were all sorts. So America is bad. The founding fathers are bad. American history is bad. I believe that liberals basically, the most serious error that liberals have made, which has made it so hard for them to win presidential elections, is that they don't really get the national motto, which is E pluribus unum. Liberals, since the 60s, have especially basically celebrated pluribus and not really been concerned about unum at all. So diversity and multiculturalism, let's, pluribus, 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 no unum. And those things have actually been shown to decrease trust, decrease social capital. They backfire, actually. Liberals often block efforts to increase unum. So English is the national language. This is a contentious issue because one of the few things uniting America is our language. Liberals often end up being unpatriotic universalists. The flag is not sacred, and they often call themselves citizens of the world, as Obama famously did in Berlin. Here's one of our survey items. I identify more closely with the people of the world at large than with people in my own country. Liberals agree, conservatives disagree. So that's the third foundation. The fourth foundation is authority. Here are signs of respect and deference in two very closely related species. Not that it feels the same, but the ethology, the bodily displays of submissiveness are the same, or similar. shows a respect for our leaders. Conservatives seem to care a lot more about this, but liberals basically, can certainly understand it, that respect should be shown. And the Joe Wilson moment when Joe Wilson said, "You lie," very disrespectful. Liberals can get that, especially if it's their guy being disrespected, although when it was Bush in the office, presumably many would have thought it was quite appropriate to disrespect the president. In general, if you look at, if you see images such as this one down here says, "God's in charge, so shut up." What do you think? Unitarian or Baptist? Whereas if you see signs like this I used to subscribe to The Nation, you can buy a coffee cup that says insubordination. Celebrate insubordination. That's good. Authorities are bad, so insubordination is good. Annoy a Republican, question authority, because they're just authoritarian ignoramuses. So we liberals, we think for ourselves, but they don't. And once again, here I'd like to concentrate on the top one, the no gods, no country, no masters. There's a very strong anti-authoritarian streak in most liberal morality. So here's the kind of sacrilege that you'll commit based on this foundation. Once again, if you start by sacralizing victim groups, then you will demonize powerful groups. Capitalists, I don't think it's so much sacrilege when the left opposes capitalists. But police, teachers, signs of authority, symbols of authority, conservatives get very upset at the liberal efforts to subvert their authority. You'll side with the underdogs to weaken the powerful. You'll do things like pushing strongly for laws that allow teenage girls to get abortions without telling their parents. I forget where I heard some woman say this. She said, "I would never let my 13-year-old daughter pick her own dentist. But I'm supposed to let her pick her own abortionist?" I mean, that's pretty outrageous. And if you felt that there was a political party pushing to let your daughter get an abortion without your knowledge, how would you feel about that? Liberals then tend to heap contempt on traditions and bourgeois virtues. Hollywood almost never celebrates any sort of authority or tradition. It's usually shown as just racist, corrupt, suburban idiocy. And the net effect is that liberals are seen as subverting order and promoting chaos. I think this is why the Obama, when it was modified to look like Heath Ledger as the Joker and Batman, who's the representative of chaos, I think it works for a lot of conservatives. They see liberals as the force of chaos. They see them basically as Satan. The fifth foundation, there's one more to go. I'll do this quickly. Issues of sanctity and degradation. Purity, what does that mean? Sexual purity. Well, this is a painting called The Allegory of Chastity. So, all right, purity is about guarding women's sexuality and patriarchal oppression to keep it for the man, right? Well, liberals are certainly opposed to that view of sexuality. They celebrate sexuality, deviant sexuality, unusual sexuality. This is from Madonna's album, Sex, I think it was called, or a book called Sex. Drug use. Basically, there are two ideas out there. One is that the body is a temple. The other is that the body is a playground. There's a bumper sticker I saw in Charlottesville. Your body may be a temple, but mine's an amusement park. So let me go on my ride. Again, you're not hurting anyone. What business is it of yours, what I do in the bedroom or in a crack den? To really illustrate this, to give you the feel for this, I think a good way to think about it is this. So I Googled family or American family, and I deliberately picked a seemingly white middle-class suburban family with two daughters. I picked of the options, I did that one deliberately. I'd like you to put yourself in their place, raising two daughters in this day and age. Some of you have daughters. It works for sons too, but not quite as well. And just imagine all the threats that you have to fend off as a parent. You've got Madonna. You've got people saying, "Oh, split your tongue. Pierce your nose." I don't even know what those things are in his nose. But modify your body. It's cool. Take drugs. It doesn't hurt anyone. Burn the flag. It's free speech. Abortion. It's choice. Kevorkian. If you want to end your life, everyone should be able to. Yeah, so is anything sacred on the left? Yes. Victim groups. You don't make jokes about victim groups. So, if again, as I've said, if this is your morality, then you end up supporting practices that disturb most Americans. Abortion is really disturbing. Especially when we get into, say, the fourth, fifth, sixth month. I think liberals are on very tenuous ground in pushing for unrestricted access there. By tenuous ground, I just mean they are really asking for it in terms of activating people's care foundations, people's concern about innocent victims, as well as many other concerns. So you must support out-of-wedlock births because sex is good and marriage is not necessary. You must support gay sex. Again, I'm very pro-gay rights, but I'm just saying the left is identified with all of these positions that end up really offending a lot of people. You end up seeming to support libertinism, not liberalism, but libertinism, and you're fostering social decay, and you always end up adopting utilitarian bioethics, cloning, stem cells, assisted suicide, whatever. You just have a harm-based analysis. If it reduces total suffering, do it. Life is not sacred. Life is up to people to choose what to do with their own lives. So that's the fifth foundation. The very last foundation, the newest one that we've been really forced by the data to add, is that there are very strong, deep concerns about liberty. But it took us a while to understand this. The key was coming upon this work by the anthropologist Chris Bohm called Hierarchy in the Forest. And his point is that chimpanzees and most other primates are really despotic, hierarchical, the ones that are closest to us generally. Bonobos less, but even still they're hierarchical. Yet hunter-gatherers are always egalitarian. Yet, as soon as agriculture comes in, they're all really hierarchical. So what's human nature? And his answer is hierarchical. Absolutely hierarchical. But we also hate alpha males. So we hate being dominated by abusive alpha males. So we have this ability to gang up, to take down bullies. We hate bullies. We are hierarchical, even despotic creatures. Bohm's point is that it's not that we all want equality. There's not a deep human desire to live equal. There's a deep human desire to not be dominated, bullied, or oppressed. And we get together to take down those bullies. And it's so obvious once you see it. I couldn't believe this was in front of my face every day of my life. Here's the flag of my state. It has a murder on it. My flag has a murder. Here is virtue standing on the chest of a tyrant. You can see his crown has been knocked off. Sic semper tyrannis. Thus always to tyrants. Who else said that? Right. John Wilkes Booth. Sic semper tyrannis. Who else had that on his T-shirt when he blew up the Murrah Federal Building? McVeigh. So people who commit violence often believe they are taking down bullies. This kind of murder is ethical. My state flag celebrates moral murder because it's in the service of liberty, fighting oppression. So the crucial distinction here is negative liberty, that is, the kind of American give me liberty or give me death. This is don't tread on me, don't hem me in, don't tell me what to do, don't force me to obey your rules. This is a very deep, very powerful sentiment. But the trick here is to understand that there are two kinds of liberty at play in our political discourse. There's negative liberty, which is the absence of obstacles which block human action. This is the common sense understanding of liberty. And then there's a new notion that developed in the 20th century, especially in Europe, called positive liberty, which is, well, it's all well and good to say that people should have a right to do as they please, but if you can't get an education, then you don't really have a right to do as you please. And if you can't get health care, well, you're not healthy enough to take advantage of the opportunities of our society. So we have to give people, as rights, education, welfare, food, a right to a job, all these rights that they enshrine in Europe. That is known as positive liberty. It's really crucial to recognize that the top one is deep, emotional, obvious, everyone gets it. The bottom is a subtle cerebral concept developed by philosophers gradually, has very little emotional resonance. You probably understood my description, but it doesn't rankle. Violations of it don't rankle in the way that violations of negative liberty do. So what happens is the right, what we now call conservatives, we also can call sometimes classical liberals. They stand for liberty, that is negative liberty. Give me liberty, don't tread on me. Just as they said in the 18th century, it's the government which is the threat. Whereas liberals gave up liberty, basically. Liberals embraced positive liberty and now act in ways that actually violate negative liberty. So if, as I say, you sacralize victim groups, then you try to increase positive liberty for those sacralized groups, you then push laws that will violate the negative liberty of others, such as the nanny state. Right-wing literature is full of anger at liberals trying to tell them what to eat, what to wear when they're driving, what to smoke, what not to, trans fatty acids, So the nanny state rules, restrictions on economic liberty, telling businessmen how to run their businesses, the insurance mandate in the healthcare law. It makes sense that liberals are opposed to big corporations. There's really no other way that that could have played out. But it's kind of a shame that the small businessmen are overwhelmingly Republican. They hate the Democrats. And that's a shame, because liberals stand up for the little guy. And the small businessmen should be the little guys in this battle. They create an enormous amount of social capital, an enormous amount of wealth, and they hate the Democrats and liberalism in general. Also along this line, you desanctify private property because it's for the common good, and the Dalai Lama has some things that are a little bit along those lines. Here's one of our survey items. If a person really needed to visit a friend in the hospital, and so he borrowed a stranger's bicycle for an hour, and the owner never found out, I would say this was okay. Liberals agree, conservatives disagree. Again, private property isn't very important to liberals because they have a one foundation morality. And hey, if you're going to visit a friend in the hospital, you're being compassionate? Fine, take a bicycle. All right, so you get my point. That if you have a one foundation morality, you are going to commit 5 kinds of sacrilege. You're going to really anger most Americans who are going to respond to right-wing appeals that have painted liberalism as a dirty word since the Reagan years. And you're going to see a country such as ours in which, this is from Gallup data, the percentage of people who describe themselves as liberal is down here, conservatives are here, the dark green moderates are this line here. This is the surge in liberalism from 19 to 22%. That's the surge that brought Obama to power, but then it's back down. So this is our nation. I think there are some very good reasons, and moral psychology can help us understand why our nation is like this. So that's all I'll say about this third point, that to relieve the suffering of victims, liberals violate the other 5 foundations and commit 5 kinds of sacrilege. So that's the main message of my talk in terms of moral psychology. Now, to come back to C-Care, and to anybody who cares about how do we promote more altruism and compassion, what can we do? Well, the first step is to realize that if you have a one foundation morality, and you think that that's all of morality, well, how could anyone oppose you? I mean, this is moral. So the first step is just recognize that the programs that are associated with this political view are also associated with sacrilege and outrage by many or most Americans. Secondly, my general piece of advice, and this is the last part of my talk today, is that I think a much better way to go about promoting altruism and compassion is, rather than trying to change people to become more compassionate, I'm giving away my, I already gave the answer. All right, never mind. Pretend I didn't say that. All right, here we are. So you say you want more care and altruism. Well, you know, we all want to change the what. As Jim mentioned, I wrote a book called The Happiness Hypothesis. The central metaphor there was that the mind is divided into parts that sometimes conflict, like a rider on an elephant. I could have picked horse and rider, but I wanted an animal that was much, much bigger, much, much more powerful, and much smarter. The rider is our conscious, controlled mental processes. We humans have the ability to reason, to work things out in a serial fashion, to reason propositionally. So that's the rider. But almost all of our psychology, almost all of our mind, is automatic, intuitive processes. We have pretty much the same brains as other mammals, structurally the same as chimpanzees. Every part has grown somewhat. But our brains are very, very similar. It's not likely that evolution rewired everything and said, oh, now people have language. Well, let's get control of behavior away from all those automatic processes that have been in development for 400 million years. Let's give control of behavior to this conscious reasoning ability. Okay, let's rewire all those huge neural circuits. Okay, that can't happen. So we are basically animal brains. We are animals who have this additional ability to think rationally, reasonably, and linguistically. And so, given that setup, if you want to increase care and altruism, what do you think? Do you think it's more effective to train the rider, to give people arguments and reasons for why they should be compassionate, and then give them the tools to do so? You think that'll be effective? Or do you think it'll be more effective to train the elephant, to change people's habitual mental habits, habitual response styles, and work on their moral emotions? Right? Raise your hand if you think we should invest most of our work in training the rider. Raise your hand if you think we should invest our work in training the elephant. Okay, I think that's a better answer than the rioter, but actually, here was the trick question, there's a third option. And this was actually pointed out by Chip Heath, a professor here at Stanford in the business school. I worked with Chip a bit. He called me up before he wrote this book, switched, and said, John, we'd like to use your metaphor of the rider and the elephant. Can we use it? I said, take my metaphor, please. And what they did with it was they said, this is how, how to change things when change is hard, especially in a business context. How do you, it's so hard to change yourself, how do you as a manager change people, other people who are working for you? That's extremely hard. And what they basically said was, you can work on all three, but you get the best bang for the buck. You often get the biggest bang for the buck by changing the path that the elephant is on. And I think this is right. And I wish I'd thought of it. They were absolutely right. They really improved the metaphor that I'd used. So here's the way I suggest that you think about it. If you are interested in improving the world, and if for you improving the world means that people are less violent, less cruel, more caring and compassionate, then I suggest you think about it this way. Let's create a 3x3 table about where you can intervene. As I said, you can change the rider, the elephant, or the path. And then what contexts you want people to be different in. Are you going to focus on close relationships where there already are bonds of love and people have a common future and there's all sorts of stuff between them? Is that where you want to work? Or how about people who are just members of the same school or company who know each other, they have a community, but they have no necessary affection for each other, let's say? Or do you want to focus on strangers, especially helping people far away who are suffering the most? And what I find is that in philosophy, the general view is altruism means helping strangers, especially poor people in other countries, because a small sacrifice from you, $5, could actually make a big difference to somebody else. In fact, if you're sacrificing to help your family, that's not even altruism. You don't get credit for that. So philosophers tend to focus on giving reasons why people should be altruistic towards strangers, especially strangers very, very far away. Does that sound promising to you? Does it seem like a good way to go about making the world a better place? I don't want to say it's worthless. Peter Singer has changed many, many people just from reading his books, Animal Liberation and Practical Ethics. So it's not that this has no effect. And it's not expensive to do. So of course philosophers should keep doing it. Good reasons do play a supporting role, I'll argue. But the approach taken by Buddhists, I think, is much better in two ways. The first is that Buddhists obviously are focused on changing the elephant. That's what meditation practice is. That's what the Eightfold Noble Path is. It's a rigorous, many-year process of changing your automatic reactions to people so that you are more loving and less angry. So I think that's very wise, and I think that's a big step in the right direction. Secondly, again, reading the Dalai Lama, the book on ethics, it's very clear he's talking about all human relationships, from strangers to spouses and parents, everything. So I think the Dalai Lama approach is much more likely to succeed and much more likely to give you a payoff than is focusing on convincing rioters that they should help starving people elsewhere. Not that that's, again, it's a good thing to do, but it's just in terms of bang for the buck, I think this is a very promising approach. But what I'd like to argue, and this is the really last major point I'm going to make today, is to return to the Sowell vision, the two visions. I think, especially in this country, the biggest bang for the buck will come from changing the path in ways guided by the insights of constrained visionaries. Okay, what do I mean by that? So once again, here's the unconstrained vision, that human nature is malleable, et cetera, and here's the constrained vision that human beings need external structure. So we need laws, institutions, customs, traditions. We need all that stuff as context in which we can engage with each other, treat each other honestly, decently, with care. Again, Sowell makes it clear, his role models here are people from the English and Scottish Enlightenment, people like Adam Smith, Edmund Burke, David Hume. One of Adam Smith's most famous lines, "It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own self-interest." Now, Smith wrote the theory of moral sentiments. He was he was a positive psychology guy. He said, we have compassion. We feel for each other. But he also knew that, especially in interactions with strangers, self-interest is a much, much more powerful spur to action than are these moral emotions, and especially the concern for reputation. Edmund Burke, similarly, did not want to change human nature. His basic argument, especially after watching the French Revolution And the radical agenda pursued by the unconstrained folks in the French Revolution, he wrote, "We cannot change the nature of things and of men, but must act on them the best we can." I think that's an extremely wise line. We cannot change the nature of things and of men. All right, things, I think actually, all right, we can change the nature of some things, but we cannot change the nature of men. Let me amend that. We must act on them the best we can. So many of you have heard of these books, Nudge and Predictably Irrational. These, I think, are examples of the way to think about social change. You can develop a moral education program, an empathy education program. You can make people do it for dozens and dozens of hours over the course of a semester, or on a web-based tutorial, whatever. People can put hundreds of hours in, and you can measure them at the end of the intervention, and you will usually find no effect, and sometimes you'll find a small effect. Or you can do simple little things. Nudge, the classic example is, you put you make something the default when you're checking a form, and suddenly everybody's an organ donor. Or you put the healthy food at eye level rather than below, and suddenly people are buying more healthy food. Simple little changes have big changes on behavior. To move into the moral domain, Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational, he did all these amazing studies on cheating. He found that when people can get away with it, not just because they're not being watched, but then they have plausible deniabilities that they themselves can tell themselves that they didn't cheat, they can make up an excuse, most people cheat. Most people in his studies cheat at this math test that you get money for answering right questions. But when you do simple little things, obviously anything that makes you think you're being watched, bang, cheating goes away. But even simple things like they did a field study on insurance claims. People can exaggerate what they lost. At the end, they're supposed to sign that they didn't lie. So he convinced an insurance company to put the pledge at the beginning. At the top, before you list your items, you sign that you're not going to lie, or that you're going to do this honestly. And he just compared when you sign at the beginning or end. I think it was a 20% reduction in the amount that people claimed on their losses. Simple little things activate certain concerns at a certain time. They make the elephant think, oh, okay, let's go this way instead of that way. This is the way to get a huge bang for your buck if you want to change human behavior. The unconstrained vision, I believe, has the worst track record in the history of ideas. This is a terrible and really dangerous idea, quite frankly. In the French Revolution, I've been stunned to read this for the book that I'm writing to read on the French Revolution. My beef with them is that they're rationalists. They think that reason is a reliable way to find truth. It's great in the natural sciences, but once you care about something, if you have passions, if it's a moral issue, reasoning is the slave of is the servant. What is it? David Hume said, reasoning is the slave of the passions and can pretend to no other office than to serve and obey them. I think Hume was right. So I'm very concerned about rationalists, but what I discovered is that in one of the few places on earth where the rationalists got control of an entire country and were able to do with it what they wanted, they created a cult of reason. They banned the clergy. They killed the nobles. And what we had wasn't, oh, let's get rid of nations and religion, and then people will be one. No, what they had was most people didn't, or a lot of people didn't want to go along with the revolution. And of course, they're wrong because we know we're right. We have reason on our side. They called themselves the party of reason, also the party of humanity. The French revolutionaries ended up murdering hundreds of thousands of people. They committed a genocide in the Vendée region, lining people against the walls and shooting them, putting them out into boats and sinking the boats. The French revolutionaries committed genocide. They would round people, anybody who was accused of anything, rounded up, pronounced guilty, guillotined. We don't usually say, well, yeah, they committed genocide, but other than that, oh, the French Revolution was great. So the French Revolution was based on the most extreme unconstrained view, the philosophes, Condorcet, Sam Harris, people like that. Other research on 19th century communes. Richard Sosis, an anthropologist, he found the records of communes in the 19th century. Many were organized, were socialist communes based on equality and openness. Many were religious communes. And he looked to see how long did they last. Answer, the religious ones tended to last 2 to 3 times longer than the secular ones, because if you bind people in, it turns out the active ingredient was demanding sacrifice, making them change their names, wear funny clothes, cut off contact with the outside, give up certain foods. If you ask for sacrifice, if you constrain people, they form a community of trust, and they don't cheat each other. And if you say, welcome everyone, constraints are bad, it quickly decays into moral chaos. Again, the unconstrained vision, when it gets a chance to run things, screws it up. 20th century communism, fascism, any movement that tried to create a new man ends up committing atrocities, ends up committing mass murder. I don't know if there are any historians here, but as far as I understand it, most left-wing revolutions have ended with mass murder because you have this utopia. People don't go along because you got human nature incorrectly. They don't go along, but you know you're right because you have reason on your side, so you use force, and then use more force, and then use more force. And you end up like Cuba or North Korea or the other communist revolutions. It doesn't work. The unconstrained vision in the sciences and the social sciences has denied that there's human nature. They're just wrong about that. It's a really terrible idea scientifically. They've denied evolutionary psych. Evolutionary psych has some problems, which I think are being fixed, but the idea that our behavior is not influenced by evolutionary history is bizarre. And to bring it really home to this group, altruism studies, there's a lot of research on altruism. Dan Batson is on your committee, I know. So just one example of a famous altruism study. People come into these are seminary students at Princeton. They come into for a study. They're supposed to go across campus or a little ways on campus to tape a radio show on the Good Samaritan. They're going to be asked about the Good Samaritan for half of them. For the other half, it's something else, I forget what, but nothing to do with religion. On their way, they encounter a man lying in an alley. What do? How many of them stop to help? Does it matter if they were told that they were supposed to lecture on the Good Samaritan or not? No, it doesn't. That doesn't make a difference. But crossed with that manipulation, half of them were told, okay, so now you should go over and give the radio address, and oh gosh, I'm sorry, you're kind of late, so you need to hurry. And the other half were told, well, you should need to go over and, well, you got like 20 minutes, but you might as well go over now just to make sure you're there in time. Huge difference. People who are in a rush don't stop to help. People who have time stop to help. People are lecturing on the Good Samaritan doesn't make a difference. My point is, these little things, if you think if people are busy, if they have time pressure, they're very uncompassionate. And if they have more time, they're compassionate. I was talking with some of the C-Care staff at lunch. We were talking about nurses. Oh, how, many nurses feel that they lack compassion. What if they meditate? Can we have them meditate? These women are so overburdened. They have no time for meditation. If you could give them 5% less work to do, they could be more compassionate. And of course, they told me, unfortunately, we've been told that's never going to happen. But my point is, don't try to change people, try to change the path. Okay. And so, again, as I said, don't train people to be ethical. Rather, put most of your effort into changing paths. Focus on changes that help the moral emotions to work as designed. And that means primarily 2 avenues for intervention. One is harness our massive concern for reputations. This is probably the most important spur to moral behavior. If you think other people are watching, if you think it's going to redound well to your reputation, boy, does that make people ethical, caring, compassionate, nice, honest. And if you think nobody's watching, moral behavior plummets. So concern for reputation, Hume, Darwin, Smith, all of the great, many of the greatest thinkers in the social sciences and philosophy, earlier philosophy, understood this. And the second one is, yes, we have compassion and sympathy. These are part of our nature, as the Dalai Lama says. But set things up to allow those emotions to work as they were designed to do. In other words, help them work in their parochial way. So what does it mean to be parochial? Well, if you're a universalist and you think that you shouldn't favor your in-group, you're going to favor increasing compassion among strangers. But if you're parochialist, you think that the sphere of action should mostly be in the groups that you're already in. The Dalai Lama is a universalist. Here's an amazing quote from him. Buddhism remains the most precious path to me. It corresponds best with my personality, but that doesn't mean that I believe it to be the best religion for everyone, any more than I believe it necessary for everyone to be a religious believer. So, no, Buddhism's not better than other religions. And here's Barack Obama. Well, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect the Brits believe in British exceptionalism, and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. No, who could possibly say that one nation or one religion was better than another? That is so parochial, so primitive, so exclusionary. So if you are a universalist, you tend to demand impartiality. Well, I'll skip this slide. My point is just that utilitarians and deontologist philosophers tend to discount parochial actions, that is, actions that favor your in-group. You don't get credit for those. And this kind of morality feels cold and inhuman. It's really impossible to live up to the morality of Immanuel Kant or Jeremy Bentham. I'll skip this data. There's all these new findings on parochial altruism. It's really a hot topic in social psychology. If you set things up so that people can cooperate with people that they have some tie to, some sense of shared future, if they have similarity, if you tell them they have the same birthday, anything that makes people feel more similar or that they're connected into the future makes them cooperative, helpful, altruistic. Parochial altruism is really hot, really powerful. And here's the really cool thing. I came across this quote from Adam Smith. This just blew my mind. Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments is talking about this movement in the 18th century, people, the French Revolution, the French philosophers calling themselves the party of humanity, universalism. And Smith says, well, yes, it's true that if you are patriotic, that can actually encourage people to do some things that might be harmful to people in other places. Parochialism, patriotism, groupishness, this can have some negative effects. He doesn't dispute that. But then look what he says. He suggests that actually a parochial world is a better world from a straight utilitarian point of view. Look what he says. That wisdom which contrived the system of human affections seems to have judged that the interest of the great society of mankind would be best promoted by directing the principal attention of each individual to that particular portion of it which was most within the sphere both of his abilities and of his understanding. In other words, think local, act local. If your slogan is, think global, act local, it's not going to produce as much local action. And this is why studies, the data is sometimes contested, but I think there's a lot of data suggesting that conservatives are more charitable, they give more blood, they basically do more for others than do liberals. Liberals support policies of welfare, government policies to help people, but when given chances to help, conservatives end up giving more. Is that because they, as people, are better people? Is that their elephants are more habitually generous? Maybe a little bit, maybe not, I don't know. But what I'm confident in is that because conservatives set themselves up in parochial communities, they join churches, they're more likely to join their neighborhood associations, they're more local, they're less cosmopolitan, they travel less, they're more rooted. You put yourself into groups, you're going to be more compassionate. So again, if you set up your environment, your situation, your society to encourage this kind of Adam Smith parochialism, that might well be a better society than one in which we try to get everybody to give to save Darfur. In conclusion, if we return to this puzzle, if compassion is so good for us, why doesn't everyone pursue it? Well, yes, there are psychological obstacles, but I believe much more powerful are the moral and political obstacles. And if, as I said, I made these points. If morality is broader than most liberals think, then you're going to have to broaden your moral thinking, your moral appeals. You might consider some conservative ideas, such as constrained parochialism. I suggested that the most productive avenue of intervention is especially down here, not up here. And so if we return to the mission of C-Care, of searching for methods for cultivating compassion and promoting altruism within individuals and society-wide, my closing recommendation is this. Yes, draw on Eastern wisdom. There's a great deal of Eastern wisdom. But specifically, it is use indirect methods rather than direct. And I think this is an area where the East is wiser than the West. Use indirect methods, that is changing the path, not the people. And secondly, recognize that the whole community of people doing this research, probably funding this research, advocating for these programs politically, is generally speaking members of a single moral community with a care-based morality. So if your whole community is yin, you better consult some yang. And that's my closing words to you. Thank you.
Perhaps commenting, before we take questions, since I'm quoted, I'd like to respond a little bit. It is interesting that we can make any argument if we use the extremes of behavior to focus a light on that, which I think in some ways my friend and colleague, Dr. Haidt, has done. But I'm certainly in agreement, though, with the fact that a lot of our actions are actions of context, and certainly I don't think anyone's intent, at least in our group and what we strive to do, either focuses strictly on the yin without the yang. We are human beings. We are mammals. We are products of evolution. And as a result of that, we have limitations. And in fact, I would argue with you, and I think it supports what Dr. Haidt has said, that part of the problem here is that we have become a global community. Our evolutionary construct in the way in which we act has not caught up with that, to our failings, if you will. That we are not actually prepared with the tools that we have been given by evolution to respond to the world in which we are at today. It is interesting when we talk about, as an example here, of the Tea Party movement. You know, I lived in the Bible Belt for a while. Now, this is one of the most obviously religious places in the world, isn't it? This is where people espouse the values of the Bible. Yet, in that community, what do you see there? You see one of the highest divorce rates in the United States. You see one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the United States. You see one of the highest high school dropout rates in the United States. You see one of the highest levels of poverty in the United States. Yet, if we use the construct that we're talking about, which is religiosity, it is a chimera, I would suggest to you, because we are human beings who have the failings of human beings. It is wonderful to espouse a doctrine of boundaries, controls, constraints. Unfortunately, most of us can't live within them. I would say that the liberal ideology is one which says we are humans, we have failings, and it is not to disregard our failings as humans, our frailties, our insecurities. It is to say they exist, let's not hide from them. Let us not paint a picture and create an image of what we present to people that in fact is a falsity. But what we should in fact do is align who we are with the image that we project, and then use the social constructs of our evolution to embrace that and to embrace others no matter who they are. I don't think anyone, at least I certainly don't believe, that compassion means you're weak or that you get walked on. I would say to you that we should have a fierce compassion that demands boundaries, that demands insights, and we look at the entire picture and not let people off of the hook. But in the face of that, to still be able to open your hearts to those individuals around you who actually are suffering. And that suffering does not necessarily have to be horrible poverty. It can be emotional suffering. So in that context, I would say that while our agenda is to promote compassion, and interestingly, liberals and conservatives never argue with that, each of us has something which resonates within us, which will allow transcendence. And that transcendence will invariably involve an intersection with other individuals. Our agenda is to look at the entire spectrum and to create tools that will allow every individual to maximize that, and is not to pick one thing that will limit them. So on that note, that is my response. I think we're ready for any questions if anyone would like to harass Dr. Haidt. Or Haidt, we're back to Haidt, not Haidt. That's right.
What I'm interested in is empathy, and how there's new science about mirror neurons that were kind of wired for empathy. And I'm kind of wondering, how does that mirror neurons fit into your model?
Right.
And using your metaphor, the elephant and the rider both are wired for empathy, and the way that they're able to communicate with each other is that they have like an empathic connection to each other. So there's kind of that physiological quality.
Sure. So first of all, I think the rider is not in any way wired for empathy. That's the rider is. I mean, Thomas Jefferson has this incredible dialogue between his head and his heart, in which the heart accuses the head of being so heartless and sticking to principle and being cold to people in the name of long-term utility. I don't think the writer is compassionate. You ask about mirror neurons. Mirror neurons exist in many other animals. They are originally, apparently, a way to speed up learning and anticipation of other animals' responses. So originally, they have nothing to do with empathy or sympathy, or rather caring. They're sort of a shortcut to learning that some animal brains do. And in humans, it seems to go a lot more. We don't just mirror each other's motor habits. We actually also we have mirror neurons that respond to their emotions. So we humans literally feel others' pain. You're right about that. And joy, that's right. So yes, we are wired for compassion. That's all true. But what I found in reading up on mirror neurons for my book was that both mirror neurons and oxytocin, which are the two main areas you'd want to look into for this, both of them show some pretty strong signs of parochial altruism. For example, it's a study by Tanya Singer in which when there are two people you're interacting with, you're in the scanner, one of them either cheated you, I think it is, and the other one didn't, or one behaved badly. And then you see somebody's going to get a shock in the next round. Somebody's going to get a shock. And when it's you, your brain responds exactly the same as when it's the good person. So your brain responds to the good person just as to you. But a person who violated moral rules, you don't respond to as much. That was especially true for men. But my point is that our mirror neurons even appear to be discriminating. People who we think are not good people, we're not likely to empathize with. Same thing for oxytocin. Oxytocin doesn't make you just want to love and hug everybody. It doesn't make you into John Lennon. It makes you love especially your group. Some Dutch research on this showed that people favored more their in-group and became even more negative towards Muslims after they had had oxytocin. So I think mirror neurons and oxytocin actually, there's just a little bit on this, but it seems, I think, to support the view that, yeah, we're wired for compassion, parochial compassion.
I think this gets back to the same point I was just mentioning, is that from our evolution as hunter-gatherers, that is the way the system is wired. That's why it is, in fact, so difficult to look out in this larger view to embrace all these different groups. But I would suggest that is the challenge of our time. And it is to see if we can, in fact, construct ways in which we can enlarge that in-group.
You spoke of the impact of reputation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I heard Colin Powell speak some years ago about the absence of shame in our culture.
Yes.
Could you comment upon the possibility of reintroducing shame?
Oh, yes. I think shame and embarrassment, are the gravity of our social world. I think shame and embarrassment are extremely powerful and important emotions. We evolved to live in small groups in which your reputation was life or death. I think it's a bad thing when shame goes away. On the left, there's a lot of opposition to shame, punishment, a lot of these negative, ugly sorts of emotions. And there is actually some research suggesting that shame-based punishments don't work as well as others. So it's not that this is a crazy idea. But this is an idea very much embraced by conservatives who think shame's a good emotion, a powerful emotion. Conservative judges use shame-based punishments, like instead of jail, wear a sign. Liberals have a lot of trouble with shame. So in part, it's an empirical question as to whether shame actually works to solve problems. In some situations it does, some it doesn't. But I personally, I'm a really big fan of embarrassment and of basically just the concern that people are watching you. And I'm a tentative fan of shame as a moral emotion. I think it's important. So here's an example. So at the University of Virginia, we have an honor culture. We have an honor system. And we have an honor code. And if you cheat, lie, or steal, and your peers find you guilty, you are expelled. There's a single sanction. That's the only punishment that we allow. But, and you can imagine this coming out of the 1840s, Virginia aristocratic society. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody's family was related to everybody else's family. Reputation was your life or death. Well, now we have incredible diversity. That's good in many ways, but what it means is that nobody's parents know anybody. What happens to you doesn't matter. There's no reputation at stake. And if you are caught cheating, everything is secret. Nobody will ever know. If you are found guilty, you're told to leave UVA, and the university will actually help you get into another school. There's no shame. I mean, shame is bad. This isn't punishment. That would be bad. Exactly. So it's true that honor codes bring down cheating a little bit, but my argument since I've been at UVA was, you guys are insane. You're giving up almost every possible moral mechanism that you could have, and you're creating this situation where the restraints on cheating are minimal, and there is cheating, and you're almost guaranteed to get away with it because nobody's watching. I mean, the professors weren't even supposed to monitor them. So, yeah, shame is really important, and we give it up at our peril.
Yeah, I thought your talk was fascinating. Do you have any recommended readings on constrained parochialism?
On constrained parochialism? Yes, absolutely. Start with Thomas Sowell's book, A Conflict of Visions. And then there are some science articles by, I think I had the names up there. I'd be happy to make this available through the website.
Well, we'll put it on the website.
Yeah,
so we'll get
but basically by Ernst Fair and Sam Bowles, there's some research on that. Also, my next book, when it comes out in January, will have a whole chapter on hive psychology, parochialism, how we evolved to merge with groups. So, is the elephant different in liberals and conservatives? I think the short answer is yes. If we look at, if we say that the elephant is all the automatic habitual responses, personality traits can be divided up into several categories. One scheme I love by the psychologist Dan McAdams says there's like these level 1 basic dispositional traits. And then level 2 is like more complicated reaction patterns, defense mechanisms. But the level 1 traits include things like the big 5 personality constructs, and so especially openness to experience is higher in liberals. So if you take fraternal twins born in a conservative rural area, and one is born very high in openness to experience and very low on threat sensitivity, and the other is the opposite. These are identical twin girls, not identical, fraternal twin girls, let's say. They raised in the same environment. The one who sees something new and says, wow, that's something I haven't seen before, that kid is going to want to get the hell out of that town and go to college in the city and is going to end up being a Democrat. And the one who says, what's that? I've never seen that before. What's that? So there's a lot of research showing that threat sensitivity is higher in people. Even there's one study published in Science. They did a white noise. You burst a white noise, and you look at peripheral physiological response. People who are conservative have a bigger response. They're more threat sensitive. That's the elephant.
Jonathan, would you say within outside the United States that this same 5 groups exist?
Yes. So this theory, I developed the theory originally with Craig Joseph and some other colleagues. We developed it originally for work, cross-cultural work. I did some research in India and Brazil, and I worked with Richard Schwader, an anthropologist, and my goal was to understand, especially East-West differences. And when I did this in the 90s, and the culture war was going strong, and then we discovered, wow, this really works well for the religious right versus the secular left. So its origin was not in America. Its origin was based on anthropological work. And secondly, the research we do on your morals, we've looked at all the different countries, and we find the same pattern. People who self-declare as liberal or versus conservative, we explain it left, right in other countries. Even in East Asia, we get the same patterns.
My point is, though, that in fact what you're probably describing then is a genetic definition that translates into these subgroups.
Well, I would say yes, as long as you take a developmental perspective in which you start with the genes make brains in utero, and that's a developmental process that can be affected by hormone levels and other things. And then a kid's born with a brain, and that kid is exposed to different experiences. So that could make the kid even more threat sensitive and fearful if she's raised in a very threatening environment. So I would say yes, as long as you recognize there's a huge gap between genes and eventual political orientation.
But if you look at the spread, percentage-wise, of what you define as the liberal versus the conservative, it still falls out pretty close to the same percentages, doesn't it?
You mean across cultures?
Uh-huh.
No. There are, so personality traits and temperament, the big 5, that stuff I think is pretty similar. But in some countries, in some eras, I mean, just look at America. In the 1940s and 50s, even when Eisenhower was president, in the intellectual environment, everybody just thought, well, conservatism is dead. Everybody is a liberal. They're just different kinds of liberals. And I'd have to explain that more. What I'm saying is that even just you look at our own history in the last 50 years, there have been big swings in the percentage we identify. Well, not so much the last 20 years, as I showed you, but there are big swings. So I would say that the self-identifications can certainly change. And the self-identifications in America, I mean, Europeans think that we're insanely conservative. There aren't that many. The conservative blocs tend not to be as big, although, well. So I'm not sure what did I not answer anything?
No, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'm used to that.
Okay, okay. Wait, I'm sorry. She had a question back there. Okay.
Hello. Hi.
Yes, hi.
Fascinating talk. I was very intrigued by the concept of parochial altruism, and to me it sounds a lot like the principle of subsidiarity. And I was wondering
Like what?
if you could...
I'm sorry, what ethnic?
The principle of subsidiarity. That this,
Subsidiarity. Okay, I don't know that term, but I can guess what it means. Okay.
Okay. I think it means that the smallest group that has the immediate need to take care of the smallest group. That's my...
Yes. Okay, good. I like that.
And so,
Exactly.
yeah, so I wanted to know if you could differentiate those, or are they similar, or how are they different?
Oh, I think. Okay, so this woman is saying that there's a principle of subsidiarity in what discipline? What's your field?
I'm in
Sociology?
I'm in the biomedical sciences.
Biomedical. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I would say that in general, the family is the best unit ever devised for caring for children, and those societies like Israeli kibbutzim that tried to do something different failed. Because, I have 2 young kids, and the amount of work is unbelievable, and the sacrifices that it takes you away from your work are unbelievable. And if these weren't my kids that I was raising, and again, adoption can work fine because it activates the same stuff. But my point is, if you want to get a lot of work out of people and invest in others, man, is the family important, and man, is a 2-parent family important. It doesn't have to be heterosexual, but I think liberals have been really making a big mistake in saying that marriage isn't important because they're afraid to discriminate against gay people, and also in African American society, marriage rates are lower, and oh my God, we can't defend those 2 constituencies, so marriage isn't important. No. What we should be saying is marriage is incredibly important. Open it up to gay people, but man, we should make it really unappealing to anyone to have kids without 2 parents committed to those kids. So yes, I strongly believe in this principle of subsidiarity.
I think that's all the time for questions we have. I think we'll be here for just a couple minutes, and unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for your attention. Yeah.